know that by exposing young minds to characters and stories that reflect a wide range of backgrounds, cultures, experiences, this diverse children's literature helps foster empathy and really empowers children to appreciate their own stories. And again, acknowledging we're in a challenging landscape right now, but it's exciting to be here with Raising a Reader, Embrace Race, First Book, NACI, and all of our other panelists to bring light and really bring resources to this important topic. I'll also jump in and say that the Diverse Books for All Coalition has a lot of work going on in this space, so I encourage you to visit our website. I'll put it in the chat then, www.diversebooksforall.org, where you can actually find the first webinar in this series, as well as more educator resources, parent resources, and more information about what the coalition is doing. Speaking on behalf of First Book, we're thrilled to be one of the founding members of this coalition, along with NACI and Raising a Reader. Both of these organizations are acting as co-chairs of the Educator and Early Childhood Professional Work Group, and I have the pleasure of introducing one of our co-chairs right now. Michelle Siosen-Hyman is the Senior Vice President of Program and Partnership with Raising a Reader, and I'm happy to thank her for all of her work in pulling this together, and I'll pass it off to Michelle.
Thank you, Carrie. So making sure I'm unmuted. So on behalf of Raising a Reader, I want to thank the Diverse Books for All Coalition. It has really been an honor to be such a part of this collaborative and passionate group of folks who are really committed to ensuring that all children and families have access to diverse books, which has really been core to Raising a Reader's mission since our founding 24 years ago. So at Raising a Reader, we believe that early literacy and family engagement are truly cornerstone in creating equity for all, which means for us, diverse books is a true necessity. So they're powerful tools in celebrating identity, fostering belonging, and exposing new ideas and experiences, all of which we know are crucial to igniting a love of reading, learning, and ultimately later school and life success. Diverse books have really helped Raise a Reader contribute to creating an equitable and inclusive world where every voice is valued and every story is told, which is why we are honored and committed to being a part of the coalition. So before we dive into today's session, I would be remiss if I also did not express my thanks for the Diverse Books for All Coalition Educator and Early Childhood Early Professional Committee, who were really integral in providing valuable input, not just on this webinar, but on the whole series overall. And so now just a couple of housekeeping items. Yes, this session is being recorded, so you'll all be sent a link to it, and it'll also be on our website afterwards. Slides will be sent out to all of the registrants. And then please put your questions in the Q&A section. And then I think, yeah. And then for thinking about today's agenda, here's just a high-level overview of what you can expect. So we're going to kick off with the research from Embrace Race on racial learning in early childhood. And then from First Book, we'll hear how diverse books impact overall student learning. Then we'll hear perspectives from a panel that includes authors, educators, and publishers, and then followed by the joy of an author read aloud. And then we'll end with some practical tips and ideas of how diverse books can spark conversations about identity, race, and belonging. So with that, let's get started. Again, a reminder, put your questions in the Q&A section, which will be addressed during a Q&A session following the panel. But up first, we have Christina from Embrace Race, and she will be followed by Jules from First Book, and they will each formally introduce themselves once they begin.
All right, I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here representing Embrace Race. My name is Christina Rosinski. I'm the Senior Research to Practice Program Manager at Embrace Race. And I know I only have a pretty short time, so I'm just going to jump right in here. So Michelle, you can go to that next slide. Thanks. So Embrace Race is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to organize and create the resources, programs, and communities that parents, educators, and other caregivers need to raise a generation of children who are thoughtful, informed, and brave about race. And specifically, Michelle, you can hit the thank you. Specifically, we think about helping to nurture resilience and joy in kids of color, to nurture inclusiveness and empathy in all kids, to raise critical thinkers about race and racial inequity, and to support a movement of kid and adult racial justice advocates. Can go to the next slide. So a lot of people wonder if talking about race is really appropriate when our kids are super young. They're not sure if young children even notice skin color, but scientists have been studying how and what children learn about race for years. And while there's still a lot that we don't know, we do actually know a lot. So children are taking in information actively from their environments, even as infants. Um, and they're beginning to notice the physical differences associated with race, even within the first year of life. We know that babies will differentially look at faces of different races, and that those patterns are actually affected by the amount of diversity within their social environments. By the preschool years, kids are already developing consistent biases that match our cultural stereotypes, where they've come to associate being white with goodness, with wealth and power and status. And they've begun to associate people of color with more negative traits. And this is for kids across racial backgrounds. By 6 to 8 years old, children are starting to be able to understand and identify experiences of discrimination based on race. And by middle childhood, between 8 and 10 years of age, children start to pick up on and internalize our adult norms around race silence. So they will intentionally avoid mentioning race. And it's not because they don't notice it, but it's because they come to learn that it's considered rude or inappropriate or racist to name race out loud. And then also around this time, their cross-racial friendships actually start to decline. So this may be partly because of the support that kids of color in particular find in peers from their same racial background, which can be really beneficial. But there's also evidence that it's at least partly due to anxieties that start to develop around whether you might experience racism in a cross-racial interaction or whether you might accidentally perpetrate racism in those cross-racial relationships. And then, of course, this decline leads to fewer opportunities to actually learn about others' experiences across racial lines. So all of this is showing that, I know I took you through that really fast, but from very young ages, children are learning about race, whether or not we're intentionally talking to them about it. And where are they learning about race from? It's not just what parents say. There are many sources of messages that kids are getting about race. So they're picking up on all of these racialized patterns in the world around them and trying to make sense of them, because that's what kids do. They recognize patterns and they start trying to make sense of them. So it might be that they're seeing who lives in what neighborhoods, who does which jobs, who goes to which schools and what those schools look like, who are the kids who keep getting in trouble in schools, who are the central characters in their books, in their movies, their shows. So all of these different sources of messages, typically about white and light-skinned people being better, being more beautiful, more the norm, and people of color being inferior, being outside the norm. That's the water that all of us are swimming in because of our culture, because of our history, because of the biases that are baked into the world around us. So Michelle, you can go to the next slide. So at Embrace Race, we really think of parents, teachers, and other caregivers as having these two roles when it comes to children's racial learning. First, they are this key source of information that is directly shaping children's attitudes, values, and beliefs about race. But then second, they're also an active guide in helping children process the messages about race that they're getting from these other sources. So if we don't give kids good information to sort of help them make sense of the messages and the patterns they see, they're going to fill in the blanks, right? They're going to draw their own conclusions, and they're much more likely to use stereotypes in drawing those conclusions and making sense of all of this. But instead, we can be actively talking to them to help them understand why things are unfair toward people of color. And there are a bunch of ways that we can start to break down these ideas for kids so that they understand that unfairness based on race still exists, and that they also have a part to play in helping to make things fair for everyone. Michelle, you can go ahead. We love this quote from anti-bias educator Louise Dumoulin Sparks, who writes, Children will naturally grow up to be non-racist adults only when they live in a non-racist society. Until then, adults must guide children's anti-racist development. So at Embrace Race, we really wanted to get a sense of how parents across the country feel about taking on this role in their children's lives. We know that parents' rights is currently being used as a framing to justify book banning and to justify quelling these conversations about race and identity in classrooms. So we wanted to know how open parents were sort of across the board to helping their kids learn about race. So this is the cover page here of a report that we will be releasing very soon, which highlights some key findings from a survey that we conducted last winter. We worked with a market research firm to conduct a 15-minute online survey of parents who had kids between ages 0 to 13. We had a sample of 1,000 parents who were nationally representative in terms of their race, gender, age, and geographical region they lived in. And I'm just going to jump right into what we saw in this sample. Thanks. So overall, we saw that parents were really highly open and interested in helping their children learn about race and racism. So 84% of parents said they were extremely open or very open to helping their kids learn about race. 61% said or felt it was extremely or very urgent to do so, given what is happening in the United States today. And then 65% said they were extremely or very interested in resources to help them. So a huge, huge caveat here is that we can't say from these statistics what messages about race parents think their kids should be learning. So there could be some of these parents who whose messages would absolutely not align with the ones that we would like their children to be getting. But what is clear here is that there's the real openness and receptivity, at least to the conversation and the idea of kids learning about these concepts. You can go ahead, Michelle. And this, along similar lines, we do see pretty clear differences depending on political orientation, which is what we expected. But we also see pretty substantial levels of openness, urgency, and interest among those who say that they lean conservative. So again, the same caveat applies here. We don't know from this data what they want their kids to learn about race, but just seeing these substantial percentages of conservative parents who seem somewhat on board at least, this runs pretty contrary to the narrative that conservative parents overwhelmingly want this talk about race completely shut down. So those folks are certainly out there, but this just sort of supports that it's a more vocal minority and not at all the majority of parents. Go ahead. And finally, it's clear that parents could really use support. The percentages of parents who say they sometimes or often engage on race with their kids are much lower than we might hope, and especially the younger we look in terms of the age of their kids. And when we asked about the challenges and barriers that might prevent them from actually sort of walking the walk, the top responses that they endorse really fell into two basic categories. So one category is about their kids being too young. So they say things like, I don't think my child, or they don't say things, they endorse things like, I don't think my child notices race at this age. I think my child is too young. I'm waiting until my child mentions race. And I want to preserve my child's racial innocence. And then the other category is basically that they're not sure how to do it. So they say, or they endorse things like, I'm afraid I might say the wrong thing and I don't know how to start. So for us, this really points to first a need to spread awareness about how early kids start noticing race and picking up on these messages and developing bias. And then two, a need to give parents tools and language to really help scaffold what teaching and learning about race looks like especially with young children. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And this is a quote from a parent in this survey who said, race and racism education is vital to make sure we don't repeat the past. If we don't educate on these subjects, how do we try to do better than our ancestors? So we agree with this quote. If this were a longer presentation, I'm sure we would talk more about sort of our why and the big picture. But in short, I'll just say that we believe that by engaging children in these conversations around race and racism and themes of fairness and justice, we can raise a generation of young people who will help dismantle unfair power structures in our society and make changes that will benefit everyone. And then finally, the last bit I want to share with you all today is a project that we're working on right now that is both aligned with the need for resources that comes up in this survey and is also just aligned with our webinar topic today. And that is this project called Reading Race in Picture Books. The goal of this project is to create a free video-based guide to both tell parents or caregivers, and importantly, show them and model how we can use picture books with kids to support healthy racial learning at different ages and starting super young, starting in infancy. We know there are so many amazing book lists out there that feature lots of new diverse books, but we're excited to actually show caregivers what it can look like to read those books with kids through a race conscious lens. So I think the author, Grace Lynn, I'm going to paraphrase something that she has written, which is books are just tools, and tools have to be used to be effective. So that is sort of the core of this project, is helping folks actually use those tools as effectively as possible, and with the understanding that this will look different for different families and might look different day to day for the same family. So please just be on the lookout for that resource, which will be coming out hopefully in 2024. That is all I have for you. Thank you for having me here. Please visit us at embracerace.org, sign up for our newsletter. You can also reach out to me. My email is Christina, C-H-R-O, you can see my name, Christina@embracerace.org. Thank you, and I'm gonna turn it over to Jules.
Thank you, Christina. My name is Jules Appleton. I am Director of Research and Insights at First Book, and I'm assuming there's a varying level of familiarity with First Book among this audience right now. So I'm just going to take 60 seconds to explain First Book and what we do, and then I'm going to dive into our research. So First Book's mission is to further educational equity. We have built a network of more than 575,000 educators, all who serve children in under-resourced communities. Once connected with First Book, these educators get access to our First Book Marketplace, which is our e-commerce site that provides educators with access to books and resources for free and at the lowest prices possible. These educators, once connected with us, also get connected to tons of other free opportunities like virtual reading parties and grant opportunities, and the chance to participate in research, which brings us to the reason I'm here today. So First Book Research and Insights conducts as many as 30 studies annually, from focus groups to large-scale surveys, and our goal is always to elevate educators' voice into the national dialogue around critical education issues. So that's the First Book spiel. My name is Jules Appleton. As I said, I am Director of Research and Insights, and I am walking you guys through today our Diverse Books Impact Study. So First Book's Diverse Book Impact Study was a roughly 6-month longitudinal study that examined how educators build and curate diverse classroom libraries and how those diverse classroom libraries impact students and teachers. So this was First Book's first longitudinal intervention-based study, which just means that data collection took place over time, and we were tracking the impact of a specific action, which was the infusion of diverse books into a classroom. So we really hope that this is just the beginning of First Book producing some much needed true impact data for the field, which I will talk a little bit more about in the next few slides. So next slide, please. I'm going to start by reviewing the key findings that we learned from this Diverse Books Impact Study first. I want to give you an idea of the main takeaways so that you can keep these findings in mind as we go through the detailed data. So what we learned from this study is students' reading scores increased after educators added diverse books to their classroom libraries. We saw that bilingual and LGBTQ+ titles drove the largest reading gains. We saw that students spent more time reading after educators added diverse books to their classroom libraries. So beyond just reading engagement, or beyond just reading scores, reading engagement also improved. We saw that allowing students to choose which books they want to read positively affects outcomes, and the majority of students choose to read diverse books that serve as mirrors where they can see themselves. And lastly, we learned that educators believe diverse books are important, but diverse books are actually a small percentage of their existing classroom libraries. Next slide. So let me set the scene for you guys. What set First Book out to conduct this study? The information on the slide is probably not shocking or new information to a lot of people in this group, but I do think it's important for context just as I set this study up. So problem number one, the lack of access to books in low-income communities. So First Book has always known that access to books in low-income communities is limited. A study by early childhood researcher Susan Newman found that in the lowest income neighborhoods, there's often only one book for every 295 children. And this is compared to more affluent communities where there's typically one book for every 5 children. So access to any books at all is often the #1 priority for educators. But if you want to get kids excited about reading, teachers really need more than just any book. So what kind of books do educators need? This brings us to problem number 2, the lack of diversity in children's books. So existing research has taught us all that diverse characters and cultures are often not represented in children's books, even though 53% of school-age children are children of color. A 2022 review of nearly 3,500 children's titles revealed that the diversity represented in children's books does not reflect the diversity of readers. One of our first ever First Book Network surveys taught us that 90% of our members said their students would be more enthusiastic readers if they had access to books with characters, stories, and images that reflect their lives. So in response to findings like these, along with ongoing research and endless anecdotal feedback from educators about the importance of diverse books, First Book has been intentionally curating titles with diverse characters and cultures for the First Book Marketplace for years. So in 2022 alone, First Book members purchased over 2.5 million diverse books from the First Book Marketplace. So we know that these books are in high demand, but how do we know if these books are actually making a difference in kids' lives? And what difference are they making? Data on the lack of a need for children's books does exist, but data on the impact of having access to these diverse books does not. And that's how the Diverse Books Impact Study was born. So next slide. Thank you. This study was designed with 3 objectives in mind. Objective 1, to better understand the impact of diverse classroom libraries from the educator perspective. Objective 2, to better understand the impact of diverse classroom libraries with respect to student outcomes. And then objective 3, to add to the limited existing research on this topic. So I want to take a moment and speak specifically to objective number 3. There is research linking diverse books to student choice and reading engagement, and there's some research out there that demonstrates access to diverse books in the classroom and at home results in greater self-confidence and empathy and cultural awareness for children. However, this research was often conducted within a single classroom or with a very controlled sample size. First Book wants to start filling this gap in existing research for the education sector by leveraging the voices of our network of 575,000 educators and their experiences. So can First Book become a go-to source for providing quality data on the impact of diverse books for the field? Next slide. Here's an overview of our study methodology. Just know that this study was conducted in 2 phases. Our first phase was a large-scale quantitative survey. And we started really by just sending a screener to the entire First Book network to gauge interest in participating in the study. We told educators they'd be required to place a fully funded order of $250 worth of diverse books from the First Book Marketplace, and then answer a series of brief surveys in the months following. We had nearly 4,000 educators fill out that screener to participate in the study, so clearly there was exceptional interest to participate. During the selection process, we did oversample for key demographic breaks. We ensured a nationally representative sample, and we ended up with 437 participants completing the study. Phase 2 involved qualitative interviews. Nearly all of our participants raised their hand and said, yes, I would love to participate in an interview for this study. In the end, we conducted 15 interviews. So with that, let's see what changes occurred when educators added $250 worth of diverse books to their classrooms. Next slide. So first things first, we wanted to establish some baseline measurements to help us understand how students interact with their teachers' current classroom libraries. Through a 5-point agreement scale, we learned that students are generally engaged in reading, but most excited to read books that reflect who they are. So the numbers might be a little blurry on the screen right now, but 78% of our educators said that their students were interested and enthusiastic about reading at the start of the study, with 70% indicating that their students more often choose books that serve as mirrors, compared to 41% who say their students more often choose books that serve as windows. And in the gold box to the right, you can see that we used the classic Bishop definitions of windows and mirrors. Windows are books that allow children to see into the lives of those different from them, and mirrors are books that allow children to see themselves and their culture reflected back at them. Next slide. So the very first promising key finding to come from this study was that just 5 months after the infusion of diverse books into the classroom, the average amount of classroom reading time increased by 4 hours per week. So this means that the addition of approximately 48 diverse books through this study, which was the average amount of books that an educator was able to purchase with $250. So approximately 48 diverse books into the classroom added 4 hours of collective reading each week to the classroom. Next slide. Beyond just reading engagement improving, reading scores also improved for our participants. So at each bi-monthly survey time point, educators reported gains in reading assessment scores, and you can see that reflected in this chart to the right. Now, of course, this would be expected in any classroom that scores improve and you see gains regardless of the infusion of new books. What's interesting is that the amount scores improved for our participants was far higher than the nationally expected yearly gains. So the NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, reports an average gain of 6 points in reading scores for a given year. Our participants saw gains of 9 points by the end of the study, so 3 points higher than the national average. And even more exciting, gains were greatest for the lowest scoring students, so those who stood to improve the most did. Next slide. Next, we learned that 2 specific types of diverse titles drive even greater engagement and growth than others. So bilingual books had a significant impact on reading scores. For every 1 additional bilingual book that participants added to their libraries, their students' reading assessment scores improved by 7 points on average. Additionally, for every 1 LGBTQ+ book that educators added to their libraries, student scores improved by 4.5 points on average. And this was regardless of classroom makeup. So we did not ask educators to report on whether any of their students were part of the LGBTQ community, for example. We saw these gains regardless. For context, there were 16 classrooms in this study that ordered at least 1 bilingual book and 46 classrooms that ordered at least 1 LGBTQ book. So this really helps us understand that there is a notable difference between giving students just any new book and giving them books that reflect their lived experiences. So I think that's my last slide, but I do just want to say, as you can see, we did learn a lot from the study. We saw some really promising results. Just $250 worth of diverse books can make a huge difference for student outcomes. So First Book will continue to explore the impact of diverse books with future phases of the diverse books impact study. We hope to execute this on an ongoing basis to just further validate and expand upon these findings that you saw today. You can go to firstbook.org to see the full report, all the dirty details. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, but that's all for me today. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jules and Christina. What powerful and important data and a kind of contribution to the field. I see that there's lots of interest in getting the actual reports. I think Christina's report, I think, is new, not quite off the press yet. So just keep in touch with her. And as Jules mentioned, First Book's research study is on their website, and we'll put links to their websites in the chat as well. And you'll also receive these slides following the webinar. So now I'm excited to introduce our panel for today. So we have an amazing panel that includes our moderator, Susan Friedman. She's Senior Director of Publishing and Content Development at NAYC, and she is the co-chair of the Educator and Early Childhood Professional Committee with me. She will be joined with our panelist, Malcolm Mitchell, from founder of Share the Magic Foundation, Read with Malcolm, Michelle Fuentes, a literacy specialist at Lee and Low Books, and Danielle Webb, who is an educator at Educare Silicon Valley. She is the director of partnerships there at Educare Silicon Valley. With that, I'll let Susan take it away.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'm so excited to be here today. Let's see, Michelle mentioned that I'm with NAYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. NACY is a professional membership organization that works to promote high quality early learning for all young children birth through age 8 by connecting early childhood practice, policy, and research. And we do many things. I'm not going to go on about that now, but one thing that we do is we publish position statements in books, and you may have heard of developmentally appropriate practice. And then also, I appreciate that we heard mention of Louise Derman Sparks and Anti-Bias Education for Young Children and Ourselves, which is one of the books that we publish. And I'm so excited to be here and talk to Malcolm and Danielle and Michelle about diverse children's books and their own perspective and their own experience. And I'll just share my little answer to the question that I'm going to ask first, which is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to share more about who they are and why diverse books are important to them. And I'll just share that very briefly. Their diverse books are very important to me, especially in relation to my work at NACY and developmentally appropriate practice. I mean, they really connect to all areas of the curriculum and connect to so many points that we are focused on in our work related to equity for young children. And so I'm going to start with Malcolm, and you can tell us all to share a little bit more about your background and who you are and why diverse books are important to you.
Susan, I will share that I feel a bit awkward going first. I am a Southern gentleman, so usually I say ladies first, but I'll take the lead.
Switch it up if you want.
My name is Malcolm Mitchell. I was born and raised in Valdosta, Georgia. I grew up your average student in that community, participated in sports, and did not fully understand the importance of education. Luckily, God blessed me with this ability to play football. I went to the University of Georgia on a full scholarship. And then I was drafted to play for the Patriots, where I became a Super Bowl champion in 2017. Along the way, I found a love for reading. And I realized that reading was the most self-empowering tool a person could possess, being literate. So I started encouraging young children to read. Started Share the Magic Foundation to impact young lives through literacy, and I became a scholastic book author. So now I introduce myself by saying I am an author that once played football.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm just going to let you know, like, the order is how you are on my screen. So I'm just going across from left to right, which is how we read. And I know about you. My dad is a big Patriots fan, and I usually don't connect with him about sports, but I did mention that I was in a webinar. Okay, Danielle, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and why diverse books are so important to you?
Sure, definitely. Hi, my name is Danielle Webb. I am Director of Partnerships and Programs at Educare Silicon Valley. And diverse books really are most important to me because representation is so powerful. I truly believe it's important for all children to be able to see themselves on the pages of the books that they read.
Thank you so much. And Michelle?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Fuentes. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a former educator and now literacy specialist at Lee and Low Books, the largest multicultural publisher in the country. And as a family-owned and minority business, our mission is to publish books that are affirm identities and for every reader, and to really connect all readers with our ever more diverse world, hence our motto about everyone for everyone. And diverse books are really important for me because growing up as an avid reader, I often got the window experience, right? Credit to the beloved scholar, Dr. Boudin Sims Bishop, for that metaphor. And growing up, I didn't really have that experience. I had the window experience, and it wasn't until recently that I was really able to get that mirror experience when I was reading I'm not your perfect Mexican daughter. And I was thinking to myself, where has this been my whole life? So it's super important to me.
Thank you. And what's so interesting, I think, is just we heard that point confirmed in the 2 reports that we heard earlier on the research that First Book did, and then also on Embrace Race. And so I'm going to go around in my the order that I see on screen. And Malcolm, I'm going to ask you, just thinking a little bit about what we heard from the presentations we just heard. We heard about it being important for teachers and parents to think about how to engage in conversations about race, but also we heard about how diverse books really do make a difference in terms of children being engaged in reading. And just could you speak to one of those points, and particularly perhaps the point about anything in your experience that connects to the idea of representation in children's books, and that actually engaging children more and being excited in the process of reading?
Of course, hopefully I can answer the first question I was asking, this one simultaneously, because I think I skipped out on that one. Growing up in Valdosta, Georgia, I always tell people it was very easy to formulate this idea that I could be a professional athlete. If I turned on the TV, there were hundreds of men running around the field that looked just like me. So the idea, the conception, the possibilities of being an athlete was confirmed. Now, there are other professions as a child that I did not see represented on television in any format. So the ideal of me being able to be one of those individuals felt a bit far-fetched. What happened to me once I started to become a reader and dive into different types of books, all the social barriers, all the social boundaries, everything kind of crumbled down, and I began to believe that the possibilities for my life exceeded well beyond the football field through exposure that I found in literature. So I always tell individuals, now, half of the battle is exposure, but then you got to culturally connect whatever that content is to the child and the experience that they're having in their everyday life. So for me, yes, books create an extraordinary amount of exposure that allow people to have enough hope beyond their immediate circumstances. But then the second challenge is, how is that exposure to different races, different professions, differences in all categories, how is that culturally relevant to the child's long-term objectives? If you can answer that question, well, then I think the needle begins to move. And I think that was proven during the presentations before the panel discussion.
Thank you. That's a really interesting take on it. And Danielle, I know that you are working with educators at the education program that you work at. And so could you just maybe answer that question with a angle on how you engage teachers in thinking about this, how you engage teachers in thinking about the importance of representation?
Yes, definitely. Just to give you all a bit of a background, Educare Silicon Valley is a unique because of the relationship that we have with our partners. So we have both early and Head Start classrooms as well as TK classrooms. And yes, we do work with our teachers and educators in terms of being more confident in talking about cultural and racial issues, especially when it comes to backgrounds that are not of their own. And like the research that was shared prior stated, just like with families, sometimes teachers have that reluctance in themselves in terms of not knowing how to even start the conversation. And that's where books come in, right? Books help start the conversation, but in order to keep the conversation going, that is where the support is needed in terms of equitable discussions in the room. And actually Raising a Reader helped support us with that, with their pilot program. Empowering Conversations was a race pilot training program that was done with our teachers here. And it allowed for teachers to delve deeper into their own issues of anti-bias, such as identity, justice, race, and equity. Unpacking their own ghosts in the classroom, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, because I know that that is a hard thing for some educators to engage in, and sometimes you have to explain the why and then the how to. So that's helpful to describe how you're thinking about it in your context. Michelle, I know you are working with a publisher, and you're working with a publisher that has been thinking about these issues related to representation for a long time, but I'm just wondering if you could talk about it from that perspective as a publisher, and then maybe how you're thinking about representation. How has that changed or evolved over the past few years, and how are you interacting with educators about around your books?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just super important to acknowledge that there's so many reasons why it's essential to have diversity represented in literature. Some of them being that the world is diverse, right? So why shouldn't our books be also? Diverse books inspire us to be the authors of our own stories. They inspire us to make us feel seen and understood. And reading diversely can help turn non-readers into readers, right? So as Malcolm was mentioning, when you have stories that represent your readers, you're going to make students want to read, and really understanding that different cultures help us succeed in a global world. And there's just so many other reasons why diverse literature and diverse representation is ever more important. And unfortunately, it almost feels impossible to not talk about diverse books without talking about the book bans that are currently happening. And with the uptick in book bans that we're seeing, we're also reading and hearing about the different policy changes and challenges that teachers, school districts are facing in the classroom. And I think what's really important for us at Lee and Low is that our Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+, and intersectional storytellers remain the pillar of our publishing program and of our work.
Thank you for that. That is an interesting take and an interesting message to your authors and contributors, and I think probably the readers and end users of your books also. Malcolm, just switching gears a teeny little bit, but obviously along the same theme. I heard, in the presentation, we heard some statistics related to books in 2 languages and how that increased reading scores and had all kinds of impacts. And I heard anecdotally that you have a book that is a bilingual book, but it didn't start off as a bilingual book. So I'm just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about how that evolved.
When I started my journey in advocating for literacy and going to under-resourced communities, I was under the assumption that it plagued my community and my community only. I was looking through a very small lens. I come from a financially disadvantaged community, and the idea that low literacy was the root cause of being in that existence is what drove me to really advocate for reading, but also beginning my career as a writer. As I began to get out in communities and learn more and more and more, I realized that there are other challenges as well. That English as a second language is a challenge. That there are other challenges that come along with acquiring the ability to read proficiently. And that's when I decided that I wanted to talk with my publisher and say, hey, let's offer up something that addresses not just one singular message that I was hoping to send, but take in this new information and try to address that as well. So yes, we have a bilingual book. I'm going to end up reading one of my books later on. I don't know if that was a surprise or not. If so, I ruined it. But I'm going to end up reading that book a bit later. So if people are still on, they'll get exposed to that text. But to answer your question, I realized that it was much bigger than financially disadvantaged students, that there were other challenges that needed to be addressed as well.
Thanks for that. That's an interesting progression of how you're thinking about it. And actually, one thing that I always try to emphasize when we talk about some of the work that I do is how we're all learners and we're all self-reflecting. So even though we think we sort of understand what it means and all different, to think about diverse books, there's always another way to think about it. So that's also a good example of that as well. Danielle, I'm just curious about your experience within your educational setting and working with the teachers that you work with, related to some of the points that we heard in the research previously about bilingual books, and then also adding LGBTQ books into the classroom also had an impact. And so when you think about representation, I'm just thinking how you navigate that with the teachers in your program, including bilingual books, including books that may represent families in different ways. We didn't hear necessarily specifically about families with somebody who has a disability, but that's another aspect of representation that may not always be in children's books also.
Yes, definitely. So our community serves mainly multilingual learners. And one thing that's really emphasized with us is that biliteracy is a gift. It not only enhances cognitive development, but it helps broaden perspectives. And when children can hear characters that speak different languages, it helps normalize multilingualism. And it helps them to embrace their own biliteracy. What I have encountered at times is just a disconnect between generations of families at time, because the grandmother may not speak English and the children are in school learning English. And what we just try to emphasize is that it's so important to keep rooted to your home language, because that's your base, that's your foundation. And reading in multiple languages helps expose children to, different vocabulary and the nuances of language that they may miss. So, and in terms of LGBTQIA families, it's an area that we are also working on, not only with our teachers, but with our parents who may feel uneasy themselves. So we are working towards expanding horizons for not only our staff, but our families as well.
That is so interesting. And also, I think the idea that families have some certain conceptions about how children should learn English, and that the idea of biliteracy or dual language learning and the research behind it is somewhat newer. And so really engaging families and understanding why learning in both languages and them speaking their home language at home or reading in their home language at home supports children's literacy development is something that educators are aware of or are becoming aware of in order to sort of work with families on that. So that's an interesting point. Michelle, I'm just wondering about your experience as a publisher, working for a publisher, and how biliteracy or bilingualism is entering into how you're thinking about the books that you publish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually like to answer this from a personal perspective. As a dual language, multilingual speaker myself, I think something that was really important at home, especially as a first generation Mexican American, English was my main goal, right? English was the main goal that I had to learn, and it was the only thing that it mattered, right? I only had to focus on learning English, and so a lot of those home connections were lost. And that kind of disconnected home from school, and the literacy piece wasn't present at home for me in my personal experience. So I think that's why the work that we do at Lee and Low by publishing bilingual stories, diverse bilingual stories, is super important, because it allows us to really showcase that bilingualism is a superpower, right? You already know your home language, right? Let's continue to fuel and let's continue to nurture that language and have that represented in literacy, right? Is something that's really important to us. And I mean, as we heard first book, right? Adding forever, I think it was for every additional bilingual book educators added to their classroom, student reading assessment scores improved by 7 points, right? So that's just continues to be a testament to why this work is super important for us. As we're working towards publishing new stories, we're constantly thinking, okay, this has to also be simultaneously published in Spanish or another language, because that just is how important bilingualism and biliteracy is to us at Lee and Low Books.
Thank you. And I did take note of that statistic related to the reading scores going up. And actually, Malcolm, I was just going to ask you a question about this. So this kind of leads into that. How, when we're thinking about children who may be struggling or reluctant readers, how do you think representation and a sense of belonging and strengths being, how does that play into motivation for children when they're struggling and learning how to read?
I'll give you this analogy. As an athlete, the thing that I disliked doing more than anything else was lifting weights. You can see how that might have been a bit of a problem. I mean, I despised it, and I'm even brave enough to use the word hated lifting weights. But every single day on my pursuit to be a professional athlete, I lift weights. Question is, why was I willing to do something that I despised doing for so long? Because I understood how that would impact my desired outcome. Right? Is every child in the world going to love to read a book? I mean, I can't answer that question with an astounding yes. But I can say if a child understands the importance of reading and how it's going to impact their desired outcome, which mine was to ensure my mom did not have to work 3 jobs her whole life, well, then that changes the way I interact with that exercise. That changes the way I interact with that skill, and that changes my pursuit and willingness to go through a tough process to acquire something that's going to help me out in the long run. To answer your question, I always say, how can I answer the question why? If a child is not reading, then why? Do they understand its cultural value? Do they understand how it's going to impact their long-term objectives? All right. Do they understand that those who don't read have to go through all these challenges that I know I witnessed as a child in my community? Is the struggle actually literacy, or are they hungry? Or do they need a hot bath? Like, what is the actual challenge that we're trying to overcome? In some cases, it may not actually be the child's willingness to engage in the activity. It's some other hurdle that has not yet been addressed. So I'm always asking questions like why, how, do they understand? How do I come down into their reality and figure out what's going on, but then also simultaneously send a culturally relevant message. Culturally relevant message is the key, and that's why representation matters. I believed I could be a football player because I saw that a countless amount of times. I remember when I decided to be an author, I threw away my first draft, threw it in the trash because I went to the bookstore and the only person I saw that looked like me was Shel Silverstein, and that was a black and white photo. He definitely didn't have tattoos and earrings. Reading books helped me overcome that cultural barrier, that I understood I too could be a part of this group of individuals. I hope that answered your question. I went on a bit of a tangent.
No, it's great because you raised some points. I mean, learning how to read is a complex process, and it's not like learning how to speak where you just kind of absorb it. You have to sort of break down and be taught certain skills related to sounding out words and those types of things. And that's part of learning how to read. And then there is also the, factors such as how hungry are you? So I think, talking about it within that complexity is a good thing. And Danielle, do you want to share your perspective on that?
Sure. From my perspective, I just like the research stated earlier, I truly believe that children engage more deeply with text when they can personally relate and see themselves reflected in it. I think often when we hear about children who are, reluctant readers or struggling to pay attention throughout the book, I wonder if they see themselves in that book. I wonder if it applies to them. I wonder if they find value in it. I wonder if they feel seen and heard. So although I'm not a football player, I can relate with Malcolm.
I don't want to try to take over the conversation, but the question is why would I care?
Right.
If you can't answer the question why I should care in a way that's relevant based on my day-to-day challenges, then I'm not going to do it. It's no different than adults. We're incentivized to do everything that we do daily. Why do we drink water? So we're hydrated. Why do we eat? So we don't starve. Why do we go to work? Yeah, we may be passionate about it, but we have to pay our bills too. Same thing for a child. Why? And if I can't answer that in a way that's relevant to them, then I can't expect them to engage. Sorry about that.
No worries, that was perfect.
And Michelle, do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as a former educator, and I did ESL, however it may be named, across the country. I struggled with that a lot with my students. It was really hard to get them to read, and it wasn't necessarily because they didn't want to read, they didn't know where to start, right? It's as simple as, okay, what are your interests? How are you feeling? Especially if it was in the morning, have you had breakfast, right? Did something upsetting happen at home or on your way to school that you just don't want to open this book at all, right? So really just getting down to the root of caring for them as a person, right? And then from there, you can start to tackle things like reading, and teaching them these skills, because if you don't care for them first and ask them what their needs are, it's going to be impossible to tackle a book. And then when you have books that don't necessarily represent them or have a storyline that connects with who they are, it's going to be even harder to get them to fully engage in these stories, right? So I think also just focusing on the questions that we're asking students is really important. When we're working with reluctant readers. And I mean, I think I could come up with different recommendations for the why. Why should I read this? Okay, well, this is why, right? Or I don't like this book. Okay, well, this is an alternative. This is another option, right? We have graphic novels now. We have high-low books. Just thinking about the different options that we have to offer students is something that I also try to think about when working with reluctant readers and students who struggle to read.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I thank each of you for your answers and interesting conversation. And we are going to be transitioning to a Q&A where we're going to get some questions potentially from the audience. And I have some here that were sent in beforehand. And so I'm going to ask some of those questions, if that's okay. And just to the audience who's here, you can put your questions into this Q&A. And that's where I'll see them and be able to ask out. And I also have to get my little device here that may have some other questions pop up for me. So the first question we have is, how do you envision the future of diverse literature and its role in promoting conversations about race, equity, and belonging? And what steps do you think that either researchers or authors or educators or publishers could take to achieve that vision? And I will switch up the order a little bit and start with you, Michelle, this time.
Yeah, of course. I would love to say that I envision a world where, or, a literature world, literacy world, where everyone is represented in a book, right? It's an ever-changing world that we live in, and we're just getting more and more diverse. So with that, our, publishing industry especially needs to change. I don't know if you all are familiar, but in 2014, Lee and Low executed the diversity survey baseline, something like that, but I'm forgetting the name exact, but our industry as an all was overwhelmingly white. And so what are we doing to change those numbers so that the stories that we're representing also reflect who is working in publishing? And we are working on our third iteration of this survey, so it will be coming out soon, just so that we can see the numbers and the representation in the publishing industry, because I think for as important as diversity is in our stories and our literacy, that also needs to be reflected in our publishing industry as well. So that's what I envision for our future.
Okay, thank you so much. And Danielle, what do you think about that?
I think in the future, I just imagine things blossoming. I look at where we are now and the platforms that are available to us with ebooks and social media, and the ability for people to create their own pieces of art and put it out themselves. I do think that if we want to keep this going, that we have to create a space Whether that means creating mentorship programs that pair, experienced authors with up and coming, or whether it's even establishing forums where underrepresented authors can connect, share experiences, and just support each other. But I think it really starts out with actively seeking out authors and from underrepresented backgrounds and doing what we can, holding that space, getting feedback from them, and seeing, what we can do to help bolster them and make sure that it's around.
Thank you. And Malcolm, I'm going to also ask you about what you envision the future of diverse literature and what you think that looks like and what's your vision. But I do also want to mention for those putting in questions that we do have Christina, who presented the research on First Book here. So you have questions for the 3 panelists I've been talking to, and also Christina, we can ask them here. Okay.
Thank you for not making me go first on that question. I don't have a strong answer. Here's what I know. I know exposure is the name of the game. And I know the more diverse books you have, you create greater exposure. And through greater exposure, you're more likely to capture the attention of more students. All right. If you start restricting possibilities through not exposing diverse books, well, then you limit the hope for some students' lives. The reason I'm able to make that statement is because that was my reality. I am that reluctant reader. I am that striving reader. I am that student who sat in the back of the classroom and when it was time to do popcorn reading, put my head down and pretended to be asleep because I was too embarrassed to try to read in front of my peers. And I am that reader who eventually ran into a book that was not allowed to be in school. That was a firm representation of the life of an individual who looks exactly like me, grew up with similar experiences, and that ignited a love for reading that changed my life drastically.
When you say it wasn't allowed to be in school, you mean the teacher didn't want it, or you were told?
No, it wasn't. The book wasn't appropriate at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, and it should not have been in there. Let me make it clear. But that is the book that I ran across that changed my interaction with text. All right.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah. Thank you for your answer. Christina, I have a question for you. Was there a difference geographically in the research that you presented, like in certain states or certain locations? Did you look at the research from that perspective? And could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I would be happy to share some of that. And to be clear, this is the parent study, right? So from Embrace Race, we did look at the dimensions that I showed, openness and sense of urgency, and interest in resources. We actually didn't find any geographical differences, which was a little surprising to us, but yeah, didn't see those. Definitely in some cases, there were some differences depending on parents' own racial background. So maybe unsurprisingly, that the highest sense of urgency was felt by Black and I'll say Black and Native parents, although our sample of Native parents was really small. So hard to say, but and of course the least urgency was among white folks, but still pretty high levels overall. Yeah, and can I just say, I'm just going to add on, thank you so much to this panel. I've really, really enjoyed hearing all of your different responses.
Okay, and thank you for reminding me that you presented, which you presented, and I did know that. I said, and do we have the person who presented? And I can't. I'm like having a hard time seeing who the panelists are. I don't see the one who presented from First Book. She's not here with us, I think. Okay.
Yeah, I think she had to hop off.
Okay. I guess I didn't get that message. Or maybe I did. Okay, so I do have like an interesting, there's an interesting question that was posted here, and And it's about books that support anti-bias education. And the question was, could somebody from First Book or Lee and Low actively emphasize the role of these books for anti-bias education? And I am interpreting what that question means, but I mean, you can each interpret what this means as what children's books would support educators or families in having these conversations, bring up topics or things that would help educators or parents talk about some of these topics. And so does anybody want to jump in and answer that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I will say that with all of our books, something that I do very closely in my role as a literacy specialist is making sure that our books have teacher guides. And with these teacher guides, it is a very robust guide for educators, and it's completely free. It'll be on the book page for each respective book, and you can download it as a PDF. But we go through and highlight different discussion questions that are available for the book, as well as different sections for parent homeschool connection, social emotional learning, English language arts applications, social studies. We really go through and make sure that the book can be used, whether it's in school, home, wherever it may have a purpose, that there is a guide for how to use the book. And we work really closely with authors and different organizations to help develop these guides that are available for every book and completely free on our website.
Okay, that is a great answer to that question. And I think my understanding is in the anti-bias book itself, and there are children's books that they refer to. Of course, whenever that book was written, there's more and more children's books. So it would be great. It's great that you're keeping those teachers' guides. And does anybody else want to add to that? And just to let you know, we're about nearing our time and we're going to wrap up. And I wanted to close with each of you sharing what is your favorite diverse children's book. Do you want to go, Michelle?
Yeah, I can go. I recently read, maybe about a few years ago, De Donde Eres, Where Are You From? By Jamile Saed Mendez. And it's a really tender picture book of being proud of where you're from. And I really identified with it as when I was teaching. And it holds a really special message for me. So that's what I would say.
And Christina, do you have a favorite diverse children's book you want to share about?
Sure, I might cheat and mention two quickly. So one is Our Skin, which is one of the newer books that really helps explain the basics of skin color and melanin, and also gets into race and racism for really, really young people. It really covers all of those in a really nice way. And we hear from a lot of our community members that they love it and their kids love it. And then the second one I will mention is Jabari Jumps, which is, I love it because it's a book that centers a child of color, a little Black boy, but it's not about race and racism. So we really like to think about both the explicit books that deal explicitly with those topics, and then also the books that center characters of color just living relatable lives, having relatable emotions. And it's just a really sweet book. Thanks.
Wonderful. Malcolm, what is your favorite diverse children's book? And maybe it's your own, I don't know. You're on mute, actually.
We knew it had to happen sooner or later. I have to say, and it does seem a bit biased, but after learning that Black boys have been the lowest performing readers since taking statistics on reading proficiency, it is my book, my very favorite book in the whole wide world. The visual representation of a child having positive interaction with a book. And I give credit Michael Robertson, the illustrator, for the cover of this book. It's actually going to be the one that I read. So this is one of my favorite books. I just happen to have thought of a few words to put inside of it.
That's wonderful. And I love the huggy feel of the cover. It's great. And Danielle, do you want to wrap it up?
Yes, I'm gonna follow in the footpaths of Christina. I'm gonna name two, but my ultimate favorite is a book by Michael Wynn. It's called The Eagles Who Thought They Were Chickens. And it's a book that I grew up reading as a child, and even now as an adult, I went out and bought 10 copies just to pass out because it's such an inspiring story about self-discovery and overcoming challenges and having confidence in who you are. And my second, which is an honorable mention, is called Leo the Late Bloomer. And it's a book that my mom got for me as a child when I struggled in school. And it's a story about not giving up. Leo has to struggle through some things, but eventually he finds his roar and he can do everything that everyone else can do. It just takes him a little bit longer.
That's wonderful. And you've each shared something a little bit different. And I think, that's the wonderful thing about diverse books is there's something out there for everybody. I want to thank you all for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation. And I love how there's connections between what you shared and what the researchers presented and your favorite children's books. And I'm going to pass it on back to Michelle now.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Susan, and thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to take Danielle's phrase, and you all certainly found your roar in this panel today. And I'm really excited. I was already excited, but I'm especially excited because next on the agenda is Malcolm reading his book that he showed the beautiful cover of. And so with that, Malcolm, take it away.
Am I taking center stage here?
You are.
So my very favorite book in the whole wide world, written by me, Malcolm Mitchell, by Michael Robertson. I will say that this book was created 10 days after Super Bowl 51. I felt like there was an opportunity for me to send a message. How about we just read it instead of me talking? All right. Inside the book, there's a letter from me talking about my journey in literacy. You heard a little bit about it during the panel discussion. I am not going to read it because I don't want to, but that is a picture of me as a child, and that is a picture of me playing in the NFL. I'm excited. Hi, I'm Henley. And this is a story about finding my very favorite book in the whole wide world. But it wasn't as easy as it sounds. Reading can be hard, Once upon a time, everyone thought I hated to read, but that's just not true. In some books, the words are too big, the sentences too long, and there are way too many pages. In other books, the pictures have zero to do with cool things I like or with what's inside of me. I do try, but some books are so giant, if I stood on them, I would turn into a giant. Other books are so boring, I'd rather use them as pillows. Henley has quite the sense of humor. When I'm supposed to be reading homework, I'd rather play football in the backyard. That wasn't hard to come up with. When I'm asked to read the cookbook to help make dinner, I would rather see how many grapes I can fit into my mouth. Once I took a wagon full of books to the town swimming pool to find out good they could swim. Henley's having a tough time with books. When I tried to read books about dinosaurs, they made my brain hurt. So I gave the books back to the dinosaurs. I've tried reading books about mountains, pickles, aliens, monsters, cats chasing mice, and mice chasing cats. I even found a book about cats chasing mice up a mountain while aliens eat pickles with monsters. But none of those made reading easier or more fun. But all that changed when Mrs. Joy gave the worst homework assignment ever. Find your very favorite book in the whole wide world and bring it to school tomorrow. It can be a book about anything. Just make sure you love it because you'll be sharing it with the class. The school bell sounded like 100 horns blowing in my ear. Thinking about the yucky homework assignment gave me a super headache and made my hands sweaty. I don't know if you can see Henley here back in the class, but I would say this was identical to how I felt. Let's keep reading. On the way home from school, I stopped by the mighty library hoping to find any book that could be my very favorite. My friends went into the library ahead of me. When it comes to finding books, I'm not so fast. Inside, there was a nice man sitting behind a jumbo-sized desk. I asked him if he could help me find my very favorite book in the whole wide world. He showed me books about science and adventure and squishy animals. He flipped through the pages of books about flags, farms, and holidays. He found plenty of books with twisty big words, sentences as long as my legs, and pictures that tangled the pages. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. When I saw my friends in the middle of the library having fun and reading, I felt more lost than ever. The next place I tried was Miss Rackley's bookshop. Maybe she could help me find my very favorite book. Mrs. Rackley did what she does best. She brought piles and piles of books. I looked and looked and looked, but I couldn't call any of them my very favorite book in the whole wide world. All those pages and all those words made my eyes tired. I realized it was going to take a book miracle to find my very favorite book. I grew a sad face and stomped all the way home. I think Henley's upset. Mama was unloading the dryer and she could tell I was having a crummy day. I told her all about the worst ever homework assignment. The librarian and Miss Rackley tried their best to help me find a book, but it was no use. I'll never find my very favorite book in the whole wide. With a voice as warm as rolls from an oven, Mama said, Henley, sometimes the best stories can be found inside of ourselves. After a sweet kiss on the forehead, Mama's words lit up inside me. That's when I had a brilliant idea. Let's see what Henley's idea is. The next morning, I could hardly wait for my turn to share my very favorite book in the whole wide world. I do want to point out, this is the same classroom scene in the beginning. And instead of Henley being in the back, alone and afraid, after some motivation and encouragement, he's amongst his peers with a smile on his face, ready to share. I stood proud as all eyes in the reading circle stared at me. Everyone thinks I hate to read, but that's just not true. Yes, some words are too big and some sentences are too long, but that's not my biggest challenge. Before today, I just hadn't found a book I wanted to read. I hadn't found the words or pictures or pages or sentences or subjects that showed me. So last night, I wrote a book. It's called My Very Favorite Book in the Whole Wide World. It's about a big, fat, bumpy journey to finding the perfect book. My book has words and pictures and pages that show me, and that show you, me. I want to be like Henley when I grow up. When I started reading my book out loud for everyone to hear, I struggled. But soon my words began to flow. The pictures I drew danced off the pages. Everyone can have a very favorite book in the whole wide world, even if they have to write it. When I was done telling my story, all my classmates clapped and cheered. My teacher gave me a gold star on my homework. And my friends, that's the truth. Great job, Henley.
Thank you, Malcolm. I hope you take a look at the chat because there's so much love for you in the chat right now and for you in the book. And I'm so glad that you had the brilliant idea that Henley had too, because I love your book and we love partnering with you on it. So I have a slide for you to announce Read Bowl. So let me bring that up and you can start to, let me just get that there. Are you seeing it?
It's coming up, yes.
Okay.
So in 2016, I started Share the Magic Foundation to inspire kids to read to a better future. I went through the personal transformation of being literate, and I wanted to share that and encourage as many kids as I possibly could, especially with my platform as a professional athlete. So Share the Magic Foundation was born. We also created virtual reading challenges. It's a way for us to bring reading and my love for competition together in the form of Read Bowl, which is our annual competition to see which classroom can read the most minutes. It takes place on January 8th through the February 11th, and it's a 4-week competition. So make sure you understand how cool this is. Third graders in Florida can compete with third graders in Hawaii to see who can read the most minutes. And it takes the classroom average. It's fun to see how competition drives excitement around reading. And that's what we've discovered through Read Bowl. I encourage all of you to participate. It's free. My foundation fundraises so we can make sure that we can provide resources, extension activities, and activity sheets to really bring some fun into this atmosphere. There's a process to learning. The first step is being willing to engage in the process. And I think Read Bowl does a great job of getting students excited about the process of reading. So that's my spiel on Read Bowl. Please scan the QR code. Please participate. It's at no expense. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. So the only thing that you risk is maybe spending a little time finding something that you dislike, but I have a feeling that you'll thoroughly enjoy it. Over 200,000 students compete in this annually. We have we have 11 different countries. So it is spreading, it is fun, it is exciting. And I also send some motivation to all the students that participate. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thanks again for participating on the panel today. I think you and I have probably been on, I don't know, close to a dozen panels or just spoken together on Facebook or something. And every time you inspire and motivate and they're just so much fun. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you and let's do it again.
All right, sounds good. All right, so we're gonna segue now into a presentation with two of my colleagues, Patricia and Tymisha, and they have been working very closely with local partners and our advisors on developing resources to really how do you support the use of books to spark conversations about race, identity, and belonging. So I'm going to hand it over to them now.
Hey everyone, next slide. I'm Patricia Cogley and I'm Deputy Director of Innovation and Impact for Raising a Reader. And I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm Tymisha Sweet, Director of Programs and Affiliate Relations.
Next slide, Michelle. So Michelle shared that equity and diversity is core to Raising a Reader's mission and DNA. And the way that manifests with our books that we deliver to early child care centers and to families is that there are more than 3,000 titles in 13 languages. And as many of you may know, they're carefully vetted to ensure high quality content and diversity. So that diversity is about the content, but also about the authors and illustrators as well. And in addition to books, we help families and educators build practices that promote social emotional learning that can help children to develop empathy, positive self-identity, and a sense of belonging. So in 2021, Raising a Reader engaged in design research to really elevate how books can spark conversations about race. And we were very curious about how children and families could experience aligned conversations. So if clinicians were given a book pack and resources and early child care centers were given a book pack and resources, how would families then be transformed in terms of their confidence in having conversations about race and helping to empower children to have positive self-identity? Next slide. So the pilot was born from that design research phase, and it consists of books. We'll show more about that later in our presentation. A guide and resources that we developed in collaboration with Noggin. Actually, Noggin created the guide and we added shared reading as an element to the guide. And a series of workshops, and thank you so much to Danielle for presenting. We really wouldn't have been able to learn as much as we did without Danielle's partnership. And so she engaged in a 5-session workshop with her educators over 3 months. And we really rolled up our sleeves and really addressed what educators need to feel comfortable using books to spark conversations about race. Thank you so much. Next slide. And today we're just going to give some, because of limited time, we're just going to give some tips and tricks from these conversations and how to spark conversations. And Dr. Yoma Aruka, the founding director of Research Action Coalition at UNC, was our key advisor, trained us. We really used her framework of positive racial identity formation to create our training. And she really inspires us tremendously. So we're going to kick this off with her general advice about having conversations with young children. And the sound is, are people hearing the sound? No, okay. No sound.
This sort your toys by this kind of shape. The children are already primed for the conversation, and don't think about, like, kids may not have the right language yet, right? They don't have the right language yet to say, well, I'm seeing something here, like, oh, I see all these Black and brown people on the street. Like, they may not have the full language or the full cognitive ability. So to me, they're always ready to have these conversations. And again, remembering that we're having conversations that's really about just talking about the diversity, talking about the joy of, say, being your particular racial group or your particular culture, or even talk about sort of like things that are really connected to them. Because in the end of it, don't forget, kids are egocentric. So the more you can talk about things that are important to them, about, what, your family name means X, Y, and Z. Your family comes comes from this place, right? So I think the more we actually talk about their own identity, their own culture, their own background in ways that they could actually internalize. And then eventually you can talk to them about, what, there's all these different kinds of people around us. Think about your pediatrician, or when you go to the store, or when you go outside, Like, I think we want to talk about it in ways that's really about joyfulness, about appreciating the different kinds of ways that people look and talk in ways that's really positive. So kids are always ready. The issue is that adults are not ready, right? And it's the point that we don't start a conversation about racial identity with all the negative. Like, we should talk about it from the joyful part and talk about it from the humanity of your own community, your own culture, your own family, your own roots. Like, when you make it personal, kids get that. Search. We already
You're on mute, Patricia.
Thank you. As Dr. Ruka shared, how do we get ready to have these conversations? And the first, we've talked about a lot already today and in our other webinar, is that the way forward is not silence. So the first is to have the conversations, that to have the conversations early makes a difference. If we're not having the conversations, then children may internalize that to talk about race is shameful. And so the first is to get up the courage to have the conversations. And that's, of course, if you're not already having the conversations. I want to say, too, that when we're talking about these conversations, we're generally talking about caregivers, so educators and parents. So we're speaking to both, and also to anyone who's leading programs for children or has a caring relationship with children. So first, stay with that slide, please, back. The way forward is not silence. And as Dr. Ruka shared, we really built our training around starting with ourselves. So when we're talking to children, to start with their identity, what's important to them, and as educators to start with ourselves and understanding our own identity. Danielle referenced that a bit in her talk about kind of digging deep into ourselves first as a key component to getting ready. When talking about diversity with children, as Dr. Ruka shared, to really make it about what they're experiencing, not to make it abstract. Who are the people in the world around them? And then continuously to emphasize joy and positivity, especially to counter negative information out there. And because diversity and celebration of identity is joyous and positive. And then to be patient with yourself and with the children, understanding that it's a lifelong journey. Next slide, please. So the materials we provide are about scaffolding conversations, but then of course, children come to us before we've scaffolded. They ask us questions, as Dr. Ruka shared. They're early scientists. They're already experiencing the world around them. They're experiencing societal oppression. They're seeing things, but they may not have the adult words for it. So what do we do when a child comes to us with questions we're not prepared for? So this really comes from our work with Lisa Kaplan, who led our educator training and is an expert in early childhood education as well. And so it's really to kind of go beneath the question and go beneath the comments with figuring out where the child is coming from and what it means from his or her perspective, to ask continuously, how do you feel about that? Why do you think that? Acknowledge what the child is feeling, to encourage ongoing dialogue. Thank you so much. And so to develop our materials, we leaned really heavily into anti-bias goals. Thank you, Nacy. And so in having conversations, it's really key to keep these goals in mind. Why are we having these conversations? They really do make a difference. We're helping young children feel pride in who they are fundamentally, helping children to appreciate the diversity of others and what that brings to our world, to notice injustice and unfairness, and to begin the process of addressing and changing the injustice around them. And with that, pass it off to Ty.
Thanks, Patricia. Sparking conversations with books and activities. I'm happy to share a few examples on how to spark conversations about identity, race, and belonging. And we've based these conversations around 4 anti-bias goals. And as Patricia mentioned, these goals may be familiar as they are a part of Nacy's anti-bias goals. And our first anti-bias goal is identity. Each child will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive self-identities. And then we simplified it. I know myself and I like who I am. And then our second anti-bias goal is towards diversity. So each child will express comfort and joy with human diversity, accurate language for human differences, and deep, caring human connections. And we simplified it. I know how I am. I like and different from others, and I appreciate others and their uniqueness. And we have a collection of books in our kits that correlate with these anti-bias goals that are included in our educator packs. And so the books that are included in our that correlate with identity and diversity is The Day You Begin, The Colors We Are, Jaguars and Butterflies, Eyes That Speak to the Stars. And I love these books. The Colors We Are is a wonderful guide. It just gives you those tidbits to what to talk about. I love that it explains melanin and different vocabulary. So it's a really nice guide. And Eyes That Speak to the Stars is one of my favorite. Well, all of these are my favorites, but Eyes That Speak to the Stars is just a wonderful book, just digging into the culture and why your features are beautiful. So not only are the illustrations beautiful, but the messages in these books are just empowering and support with conversations. And also with our books, we do include book plates that help as a support and a guide to start those conversations. So such as, tell me about the people and the children on these pages. How do you identify with these children? How do you relate? Next slide, please. And in addition to the books, we encourage simple activities that can help bring about anti-bias goals, as well as deepen an understanding. And this is one of our educators from Educare who participated in the pilot. And this is, as I mentioned, this is one of the activities that go along with the guide that was created by Noggin. And this activity in particular just builds up pride when completing activities, and it's just about identity and a great way to spark conversation among educators, as well as for the educators to learn about the uniqueness of their peers. So easy to do activity to discuss identity. And then we have another activity, which is diversity, that correlates with diversity, and this activity allows to make observations, celebrate differences, as well as sameness. And then our anti-bias goal 3, which is justice. Each child will increasingly recognize unfairness, have a language to describe unfairness, understand that unfairness hurts. And simplified, I know unfairness when I see it. And then our anti-bias goal 4, activism. Each child will demonstrate empowerment and the skills to act with others alone against prejudice and any discriminatory actions. And I believe I can make a difference in the world. We want everyone to go out. And then next are our books that are included with anti-bias goal 3 and 4 is Justice and Action, Our Skin, a First Conversation About Race, I Walk with Vanessa, and I Am Enough. And again, we have 2 activities that go along with Justice and Action. So the first activity deals with fairness and empathy, and this brings about conversations about different races, religion, as well as languages. And then our next activity paired with these anti-bias goals is activism. And this activity is good for talking about racist behavior, justice, and fairness, and just standing up for what is right. And through these activities and through the pilot, we have found that educators really have enjoyed participating in these activities to explore. And on the next slide, just to sum up everything, take your time with the books. You don't have to finish in one sitting, and that's with any book. Create space that's open the doors for questions. Help develop pride and knowledge or your child's family's history. Encourage curiosity, interest, and empathy about cultures in the child's environment. Encourage questioning and understanding and fairness. Encourage activities that give the children opportunities to stand up for what is right. And last, I just want to add in exploring race, identity, belonging, and empowerment with ourselves and with our families and with our educators is a lifelong journey. So it will continue on, and this is something that we will have to all work on. And if you would like more information, certainly reach out to Patricia. And this is her email. So certainly reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. And we actually have time for some questions if people have questions. And then I also like to invite, I see Danielle still on. If Danielle, if you are there, if you have any thoughts or want to share how your educators have been able to use any of the resources or how they've been using the books, that would be great.
Definitely. So even at this point in time, our teachers are still talking about the workshop that you all put on for not only them, but with our families. And as I go around and do classroom observations, I can see it from even our early Head Start classrooms all the way up into our Head Start. I know when we first started, one of the questions that were brought up by our educators were, the students were so young. How do I talk about race and diversity with toddlers? And as I went into a classroom just a couple weeks ago, you can just see how their classroom environment has totally been transformed based on the books that you all provided. The Our Skin book was in a board book, and as soon as I came into the classroom, a little girl, her eyes just got so big, she grabbed me by the hand and walked me over to her library area and pulled out the Our Skin book and pointed to the brown child on the cover. And I was like, yeah, that's me. Wow. And then she went to the house area and brought a brown skinned baby for me to hold. I mean, it was just, their confidence level has tripled, I'll say. They feel confident in having these conversations. They feel confident in engaging with families in these conversations. Although, it's still rocky. Sometimes parents are still grappling themselves. So it's a learning experience for both, but the mere fact that they are willing to step up to the challenge and meet families where they are and take those conversations step by step is incredible. And I'm eternally grateful.
Thank you. Let me see. I don't see any questions in the chat. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Patricia. Thanks, Ty.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing, Danielle.
Great, so no questions, so we're moving on. So this is moving into our closing. So this is our second webinar in a 3-part series. Our next webinar, we don't have a specific date identified yet, so you'll see my wonderful slide here that says save the date for sometime in January. But we will, if you are on our list now, so we'll be sure to send you updates on once we do have that date confirmed. We will send that information to you all. Also, just a reminder to sign up for Readable. You can scan the QR code here, and I think we've also put some information in the chat. And as a reminder, everybody will be receiving these slides after in the next day or in the next week or so. Everybody who registered will be receiving the slides and the recording will also be on the Diverse Books for All website and Raising Readers YouTube channel. And then also, we love to hear how we did. So there's a link to the SurveyMonkey here. I believe my colleague's going to put it in the chat. And if I was technically savvy enough, it should pop up as soon as the Zoom closes. I think I was able to make it work so that the link will actually pop up. We really do take your feedback into consideration. I saw earlier there was a note about timing. We have been playing with timing on these webinars because we had one in the evening last time. Didn't work so well for some folks, and so really would love your input. And also, if there are anything in particular you want to hear or see at our last webinar in January. So before I close, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank our speakers, Christina and Jules, who provided us that very important and timely data. And then thank you to our panelists, to Danielle and Michelle and Malcolm, and then to our moderator, Susan, and also to the Diverse Books for All Coalition, and also all of you for taking the time and spending these close to 2 hours with us. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.